Buenas tardes, bienvenidos de nuevo a esta jornada de conferencias de MadBlue 2022. Extraer, producir y desperdiciar. Ese es el modelo económico actual y está llegando a su límite. Ahora toca hablar de acciones como compartir, ahorrar, reparar, reutilizar, renovar, reciclar, imaginar, reinventar y de los actores que lo hacen posible. En eso se basa la innovación y la economía circular. Para hablar de ello, está con nosotros José Luis Soria, director ejecutivo de Last Mile, que nos va a presentar a nuestro próximo ponente. Un aplauso, por favor.
Bueno, ¿se me oye? Sí. Bueno, muchas gracias, Desiree. Para mí es un placer formar parte de este evento y poder dar paso a nuestro siguiente invitado, y para ello permitidme que cambie a inglés. As you all probably know, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it's an incredible place. Its president, Raphael Rafe, usually says, the MIT is a community eager to solve hard problems in service to the nation and the world. The MIT's motto, Mens et Manus, mind and hands, expresses perfectly the idea of not only cultivate the mind, but also take action to make an impact. The MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative was born in 2006 with the objective to provide the best education and apply academic rigor to real-world problems, so that humans and nature can thrive across next generations. So, as an MIT graduate, it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to Jason Jay. Jason, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Good.
So, yeah, hold on a second, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So Professor Jay is a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and is the director of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master's in Education from Harvard University, and a PhD from Sloan, and a PhD in Organizational Studies from the MIT Sloan School of Management. So good morning, Jason. How are you doing? How's everything in Boston?
Doing well. Probably not as warm and comfortable as it is there, but no, doing well. Do you see my face and slides okay? Or I can't see the audience, so I don't have a sense.
Yeah, we see you, so okay. I hope that we will see your slides.
Okay, all right. I am sharing screen on my Zoom here, so in theory, you should be seeing them.
Okay.
Can we just get a confirmation, because a lot of what I'm going to do is very visual today. So do we have that up on the screen?
Yeah, we still. I think that this. Yeah. We see your presentation. We see your slides. So everything.
And you see my
perfectly.
face too?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good. So, well, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the chance to engage and share a bit about what we're doing at MIT, but also to engage the whole audience in a little kind of interactive workshop here. We're going to use some technology to help us with doing that. And in fact, just to kind of get started with that, what I'd like everybody to do is to take out your cell phone, open up a web browser, and what I'd like you to do is at the top of the screen, you should see this URL, which is pollev.com/JasonJ, pollev.com/JasonJ. And when you don't have to sign in, you can skip the sign in because this can all be anonymous. But you should see this question come up on your screen. What city are you from? And I'd love to this is like a warm-up question, because I'm going to do some polling throughout the presentation. So I'd love to get this. And if you're from a city that has like two words like San Francisco, you can put a hyphen in between them, because when they show up on the screen here, they should show up they'll show up as like single words that are all going to show up in like a word cloud. So this is great. Madrid, Mallorca, Palma. I wish I spoke better Spanish, and then I would do this presentation in Spanish, but the best you'd get from me is Italian, and it doesn't always translate well. But this is great. So we've got people from Valencia, Murcia, Madrid, great. And it looks like people are figuring out how to use the technology. The bigger words here are the more common responses. And we're going to use this polling throughout the presentation so that we have a chance to kind of work together, even though we can't be in the same room together. Okay, so we're getting that started. Hopefully that's going to work for everybody. And I'm gonna switch back to my presentation here and get going. So the first thing I want to say is as the introduction mentioned, our mission here within the Sloan School of Management at MIT, within the sustainability initiative here, is to deliver the best education, apply academic rigor to real world problems. And there's one phrase that he didn't include with our mission statement, which is very important, which is to empower leaders everywhere to take action. And that's actually my purpose today, is to support and empower us to take action together on one of the biggest challenges of our time, which is climate change. And I'm gonna come back to that in a couple of minutes. What the educational mission for us looks like is that we have master's students from all around the world who come to MIT Sloan for their MBA or their executive degrees. And we offer a sustainability certificate for people who come and do that. We have about 446 people who have graduated from this program. They have to take 5 classes in sustainability during their time here. And what that means is that we've now built this global community of people who are out trying to advocate for better social and environmental practices in companies all around the world. And we get a front row seat on what that looks like, as well as entrepreneurs who are building new businesses, developing new technologies, bringing new approaches to this whole field. We get a chance to work with a whole variety of companies in the course of doing this. We believe in what's called action learning. The motto of MIT is mens et manus, which means mind and hand. And so our courses always include a component of students working on projects with real organizations in the world to advance sustainability strategies. And this is just a sampling of companies that we've worked with in the last couple of years. So part of the way that we work is by building this global community of people who are out there working to make change, and bringing their learnings back to us so that we can continue refining. Now, of course, as a big research university, the other facet of what we do is research. And we try to develop tools that we can put into the hands of that global community to support them and empower them to take more effective action on the big issues of our time. And what I'm going to do today is showcase one of those tools, and we're going to play with it and experience it together. So this is part of something called the Climate Pathways Project. This is a project underneath our sustainability initiative, and it aims to advance the adoption of evidence-based climate policy through top decision maker engagement with interactive simulations. And so what you're going to experience today is the same thing that we have brought elected officials from the US government, the Japanese government, the Indian government, the Chinese government into conversations with us, as well as business leaders, CEOs of major companies, investors of all stripes. I do a lot of work with family offices and family enterprise, helping them think comprehensively about their sustainability strategy, and dozens of leaders from the nonprofit, think tank, foundation sector, to help bring people together into a common understanding of these big challenges and what kinds of innovations are going to be able to tackle the big global issue of climate. as I mentioned, we engage with top decision makers. So what you're going to experience today is the same kind of thing that we've done, usually in person in a smaller conversation with, senators and representatives in the U.S. government. John Kerry is the special envoy for President Biden, working on climate change. And on our website about the Climate Pathways Project, you can see a lot more about that. So what do we do with these top decision makers and with all of you in the audience today is we invite people to choose your climate future, to come up with a pathway forward on global climate change. Now, some of you might be familiar with the challenge of climate. This is I think a useful starting point or orientation to why this is such a critical and important issue. This is a diagram that shows the vertical axis here is the degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So how much are we warming up the planet through emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? And you are here, meaning that we have already warmed the planet by 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels globally. If we continue warming in this direction, and if we keep going with business as usual, we will find ourselves in this zone of 3.5 degrees or higher above pre-industrial levels. And that takes us into this purple zone. So when we think about water scarcity and drought, when we think about wildfire damage like we're seeing in Australia and California, when we think about crop yield decline, so people and food supply instability, people losing access to the crops and food that we need to eat, this business as usual takes us into a zone of what the scientists call very high risks of severe irreversible impacts with limited ability to adapt. So there is a climate emergency. Now, I've shown you one PowerPoint slide here about this, and that is all I'm going to show you from that standpoint, because what we've learned is that the research shows that showing people research doesn't work. If all I did here was give you a presentation, you wouldn't walk out here with very much different in your understanding or feel empowered to take action. And so what we're going to do instead is that we're going to use interactive simulation tools. You're going to provide me some input through that Poll Everywhere tool, and we're going to try to solve global climate change. Now, what we're going to play with is a computer model that is free. It's available for anyone to access. It doesn't run on a phone, but the next time you're back at your laptop, you can just Google En-ROADS and you'll find your way to the tool. It uses data from all the big scientific agencies like the International Energy Agency and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it is fully documented and transparent and open source and available and free for anyone to use. And what it allows us to do is to ask a simple question, which is, what actions will help us to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees? That's the sort of big question we want to ask, because if you look at this picture, you can see that if we can stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we can avoid some of the worst consequences. We're still going to have to adapt. We're still going to have to change, but we can avoid some of the worst consequences. So the question is, what actions can we take on climate change that will move the needle? So I'm going to change the poll question here. Automatically reach your screen on your phone. So you keep that browser tab open, and now you should see this new question. And I want everybody to share an answer to this question. What actions will help us to solve climate change? What do you think are going to be the things that will make a big difference and help us to reduce emissions and to create a safer world for our economy and for our children and for our grandchildren? So I'm just going to pause for a moment and let you guys respond here. Green energy, reduce consumption of items, be conscious. Okay, great responses. Global agreement, commitment, awareness, absolutely. Education, ban gas. And that gas might be gasoline for cars, or it might be fossil gas that we use for heating. Save the diversity. I'm assuming that means save the biodiversity. What are some other, so what I love about this list is that you have some cultural change, right? You have education, awareness, be conscious, commitment, right? I also want to hear what are some concrete actions? What are some physical changes we can make? Or what are some policy changes? Or what are some business strategy changes that we could make to help us solve global climate change? Let's keep these answers coming. You can share more than one answer if you like. Policy enforcement, a CO2 market, so a market for carbon credits and carbon offsets, new ways to obtain energy that we haven't discovered yet, so maybe nuclear fusion or artificial leaf or other new ways of generating energy, establishing compensating mechanisms to address socioeconomic impacts. So if we're going to change our economy, how can we reskill people, redeploy those workers, and provide social support? A plant-based diet, that's great. So we can change the way that we eat because of the methane that's involved from eating beef and other ruminant animals. Get energy from the Earth's heat, so geothermal energy. So this is fantastic. Rethink economic growth. Okay, so what I want, and I want to keep these answers coming because this is really helpful, and I'm going to keep coming back to this list. Circular economy. The first thing I want to just point out is there is a tremendous variety of different ideas that are on this screen, okay? Now, I want you to think about what it's like to be the CEO of a major company. Maybe that is exactly your role, or to be a major investor, or to be the president of a country, or to be a senator who has to pass laws for the country. You have this much attention to spend on all of the issues that come your way, okay? Now, let's say that you're a politician. Let's say that you're President Biden of the United States, or you're a senator or something like that, or a minister in the Spanish government. You know, you've got to think about COVID response. You've got to think about economic recovery. You've got to think about the war in Ukraine. You've got to think about a whole suite of international trade issues. When it comes to the natural environment, you have about this much of your attention where you can focus on the natural environment. And within that, you're thinking about air pollution, water pollution, and then we've got about this much time to think about climate. So within this amount of attention, I have to think about, okay, what are the solutions that I'm going to pursue? And I have this massive list of incredibly diverse topics. So how do I know which of these things is going to make a real difference, or which of them in combination is going to make a big difference? I need some way of understanding that. And so that is why we developed the En-ROADS tool. And what this tool does is it allows us to explore the global climate. There are thousands of scientists whose work has gone into forming this tool. They didn't all work directly on it, but we draw on the literature and the reports and the papers of all of these scientists who bring together an incredible mass of information about how the physical climate works. So how does our energy use result in the emissions of greenhouse gases, result in increases in temperature, so that we are ending up warming the planet by this number, which is 3.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And as I said before, that has tremendous consequences to it. So if we look at impact, so how many people are going to die from extreme heat? You know, it turns out that actually Southern Europe, where you are in Spain, is a place where we expect 7% increase in additional deaths from extreme heat with this amount of warming. I mentioned before about crop yields. So if we want to grow the major crops to feed 10.5 billion people or 10.8 billion people in the world who are going to be here, We're already seeing, the gray is today, we're already seeing decreases in yield for maize, wheat, rice, and soybean, but we're going to see much more significant decreases in those yields over time if we keep going in the same direction. So how do we solve this problem? Well, the way that we solve this problem is that we attack the part of this that we have an influence over, which is our emissions of greenhouse gases that serve as a blanket to warm the planet. And here, what you can see is the main systems that drive that. So on the right, you can see there are some emissions from land use change, 2.9 gigatons a year. That comes from deforestation or loss of other biomass and land use change. The big chunk of this gray band here is about the burning of fossil fuels. So this is energy CO2. So this is CO2 from the energy system. And then on top of that, you have fluorinated gases, which are specialty chemicals that are used in a variety of ways in industry, very strong greenhouse gases, but we don't do a lot of, like very much of them in terms of volume, but it does add up. And then this light blue band of methane, which is very significant. Methane comes from cows burping, from manure in cattle, as well as leakage of gas across the gas heating systems. And then nitrous oxide, which is usually comes from fertilizer on fields. The biggest source of emissions is energy CO2. So on the left here, we have a graph of the different kinds of energy. So how much are we generating from coal, oil, natural gas, renewable energy? So renewable energy includes geothermal that was mentioned before, getting energy from the Earth's heat, solar, wind, hydro. Those are all modeled separately under the hood here, but combined together in this green band of renewables. The pink is biofuels. And then we have then there's a sliver of nuclear energy, which is this teal line across the top. And then what we can do here is that we can pull all of these different levers and see what happens in real time with our model here to the different to these different indicators. So let's go to your solutions. So we talked about, so for example, a plant-based diet. That was one idea that was mentioned here in your suggestions. So if I go to, how do I model a plant-based diet? Well, as I mentioned, one way is that cows produce methane. So if we move to plant-based diets, that's going to have an effect on methane. Here's our little cow. I'm going to turn on detailed settings, and we're going to look at agricultural and waste emissions. So what happens if we could decrease by 50% the amount of methane coming from the agricultural system by people changing to a plant-based diet? And in a second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this and start cutting those methane emissions, those methane and nitrous oxide emissions from the animal system. And what I want you to do is I want you to predict how big of a change is that going to make? What is the future temperature going to be when I make a dramatic cut in the emissions from methane related to cows and cattle? And I'm actually going to ask you to make a prediction. So I'm putting up another poll question here, and this should refresh on your phone. I want you to guess, when I cut emissions from methane because of plant-based diets, and that's not going to be the only effect of plant-based diets, but when I cut methane because of plant-based diets, how big of a change is that going to make? Is that 3.5 degrees going to go down by a degree? So it's 2.5 degrees. Is it going to go down by somewhere 0.5 to 0.9 degrees? So maybe it's going to end up with 3 degrees of warming. Is it going to be smaller than that? So we're going to go to 3.4, 3.2, or is it going to be no change at all? Or maybe it's going to have some unintuitive effect that increases the temperature by some amount. I want you to make a guess, because when you are actively forming hypotheses, when you're actively thinking about what's going to happen, it engages your mind in really learning and exploring these tools. I'm not going to ask you this question about every single change we make, but for this first one, I want you to get in the habit of hypothesis formation. 8 of you have been brave enough to share your hypothesis here. Let's see if we can get a few more responses here. Okay, good. I see 11. All right, let's take a look at what your beliefs are. Okay, so most of you think we're going to get 0.1 to 0.5 degrees of improvement through that reduction in agricultural methane. But some of you are very optimistic that we might get a degree or more. So let's take a look at what actually happens. I'm going to cut this in half. And what we got was a significant decrease in the amount of methane emissions. And we saw a 1/10 of a degree improvement. And you can see on the graph here. So when I'm going to undo and redo this change. So you can see that this light blue band of methane is decreasing when we make that change. We're getting a 1/10 of a degree of avoided future warming from a very significant cut in methane emissions that you can see happening here on this graph. If we're more aggressive with those kinds of changes, so maybe we move to plant-based diets, but we also get some kind of breakthrough. Sometimes there's explorations now that feeding seaweed to cows can improve their digestion, decrease the amount of methane. So let's say that we can be even more ambitious and reduce this even further. That's worth another 1/10 of a degree if we go with an even more aggressive approach. Okay, we've got a really smart crowd here at this conference. Your overall guesses about this were pretty good, but note that a couple of you thought it was going to be even bigger, and some of that is just calibrating and trying to understand sort of how this stuff works. So that's great. So that's a great first thing to try. Now I want to say also that a plant-based diet isn't just about methane. The other important piece of that puzzle is that animals use a lot of energy in being an animal. And so what that means is you have to produce about 5 to 10 times the amount of grain to feed a cow as I do that I'm going to eat if I'm eating a vegetarian diet. And so what does that mean? That means that animal-based agriculture uses a lot more land in the world than a plant-based diet would. And so what are the effects of that land use? Well, the biggest effect is that it drives deforestation. In places like the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, or if you think about palm oil cultivation in Indonesia, there are a lot of deforestation effects as a result. So maybe that plant-based diet is also going to reduce deforestation. So I'm going to cut deforestation in half, roughly. And again, I want you to form a hypothesis. How big of a change is that going to be? And so let's see what that does. That's worth another 1/10 of a degree of avoided future warming, because that's emissions that are not happening, in the relatively near future. And you can see this land use change going down as a result. So now we've actually been able to go 3/10 of a degree improvement through a massive global shift. Now let's be realistic here, right? We're talking about a global model. So everything we do here, we're pulling this lever as if everyone in the world is taking this action. So we're moving towards plant-based diets in Spain. You love your jamon. We're doing it in Argentina, where they love their steaks. We're doing it in the southern Midwestern parts of the United States. So these are major cultural shifts we're talking about in order to get this kind of change. Maybe that might make us want to be a little bit less aggressive with these kinds of improvements. But I want to keep these, keep these changes on the board so we can explore and experiment with the different options. Okay, so let me go back to our poll here of the ideas that you put forward and see what else we might look at here as another example. So one concept here was ban gas. Okay, so ban gas. Now, as I said, I'm not sure if you mean ban gasoline for cars so that we have to move toward electric vehicles faster, or if you mean ban natural gas, liquid natural gas, and so on, liquefied natural gas and so on for mostly used for heating purposes, and move toward other sorts of electric air source heat pumps and things like that. what I'm going to do is I'm going to think that you mean gasoline, petrol for cars, and say, okay, well, what happens if we, if we try to move away from oil? And there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. One is to tax oil, tax gasoline, and put, essentially make society pay for the cost of using that gasoline. And that's what it would do if I drag this slider to the left, and we can sort of see what that looks like. Gasoline taxes, are going to slightly decrease the amount of oil that's being used. We're not seeing that much effect of on climate, and we have to understand sort of why that's the case. The other thing we could do is be even more aggressive and say, what if we just stopped building any new oil infrastructure? Just stop hunting for new oil, stop drilling for fossil fuels, and just stop building any of that new oil infrastructure. That's going to dramatically reduce the amount of oil that we're using. But one of the things that you'll see, so that's the ban gas. Now, maybe you meant ban natural gas, so we can try that as well. If we go to natural gas and we say, just stop building new natural gas infrastructure, what does that do? In both of these situations, what we see is that the future warming hasn't changed. And you can see on the graph the reason for that, which is natural gas is going down, but something else is going up, which is coal. And coal is rising to meet the needs that people still have for heating. Or in the case of gasoline, what's happening here is I stop building new oil, and we're going to see more electrification of transport. Everyone's going to move very quickly to electric vehicles as a result of this. But how are they going to power their electric grids as they move towards electric cars very rapidly? They're going to power them with some amount of renewables. Okay, so if I back off that oil ban, the band of renewable energy is expanding. So some of our cars are powered with solar and wind, but they're also being powered very significantly by coal. And coal is an extremely carbon intensive fuel. And so that ends up creating a lot of emissions. And in fact, it's not just greenhouse gas emissions in that situation, but if we look at, for example, air pollution, what you can see is that in this situation, I ban oil, and what happens is I get much worse air pollution. More people are dying every year from asthma, heart attacks, and so on as a result of that policy, because it had this unintended consequence of increasing the amount of coal that we're burning. So banning oil isn't going to fully solve the problem here. Somehow I need to deal with this coal at the same time. So then the question is, well, what can I do that might allow me to do that? Now, maybe what I want to do is also ban coal. If I ban coal at the same time that I ban the oil, then now then we get the sort of full effect of being able to ban these fossil fuels. So let me do that again, just so you can see. Banning coal and stop building new coal infrastructure, that dropped our future warming by 0.5 of a degree. Okay, so that is a very, very significant improvement in the temperature, but it's also very significant improvement in air pollution, because so much of this air pollution, which causes health harms, comes from the coal sector. So ban coal and oil together, and then we're powering, now we've got electric vehicles, which are all coming into play because we banned the oil, but we're powering those electric vehicles with in this scenario, natural gas and renewable energy, which is lower carbon than the coal or oil that we might have otherwise tried. Okay, so this is just, again, we're just experimenting it. I've actually, this is great. I always learn something new. I've never pulled this combination of levers before, so you are inviting some new thoughts and ideas here. Now I'm going to turn these off just because they have such dramatic effects on the system. that I want to kind of come back to where we were after the plant-based. Now we've got plant-based diets on here. And now what I want to do is, you have had a chance now to see what this tool looks like and what does it mean to experiment with it. And now I think you're probably looking at this and saying, hey, wait, I want to try more stuff. I want to try, inventing a new kind of energy, or I want to try removing carbon from the atmosphere using direct air capture or regenerative agriculture practices that put carbon in the soil. Or maybe you want to try making our buildings more energy efficient, or our transportation more energy efficient, or maybe you want to work on population or economic growth. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you a chance to sort of click on what you want to click on. And so here's a, sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so now the poll on your screen is a little miniature version of my interface. And so you're just going to tap on what is it that you want me to try next in our little experimentation session here. So you're going to tap on what you think is going to be interesting. And what you'll see is as you put in your responses here, you got to just choose one. Actually, wait, maybe I can I allow? I don't think I can allow you to choose more than one. So each person just choose one idea. And so as you tap, you're going to see these little green pins start to show up. So someone wants me to, a couple people want me to experiment with energy efficiency, carbon price, and economic growth. I'll leave this poll open, and I can actually quantify that. So I've got 2 people who want energy efficiency in buildings, 1 on efficiency in transport, 1 on growth, and 1 on carbon price. So let's start playing with that, and then I'll come back here. So since you really want to try energy efficiency, let's take a look at that. And let me go back to my picture of greenhouse gas emissions. So energy efficiency in buildings and industry, I'm going to crank that up. Now, there's some improvement in efficiency that's already happening as a result of kind of the same rate of technological progress that we've seen historically, calibrated to this historical data. But if I pull the lever, then what's going to happen is a more aggressive move toward efficiency in buildings and industry. Make a hypothesis, make a guess about what that's going to look like, and then here we go. That was worth 0.3 of a degree, okay? I think now that you're starting to see how this tool works, you can see that's a very significant improvement. That improvement, and this is what that graph looks like in terms of the energy intensity of GDP. We've reduced that, and as a result, look what's happened here. When we make our buildings and industry more energy efficient, the overall height of the mountain decreases. So that means that we're just using overall less energy, and it's easier for a portion of that to come from renewables or any source that we want. Because we're cutting right away through that efficiency, the burning of coal, oil, and gas, we see a decrease in the energy-related emissions, and that's part of what's driving the change. Now, what you don't see when you're talking about buildings and industry, you don't see very much change in oil. Most of the change is in coal, which is used for electricity, and natural gas, which is used for electricity and heat. But you see those improvements. One of the other ideas you wanted to try was energy efficiency in transportation. So if we pursue energy efficiency in transportation, let's imagine what that's going to do. How big a change do you think that's going to be? And then I'll click it. That was worth another 0.1 of a degree. And what you can see on the left graph is that it mostly hits the oil band, because oil is what we use for transportation. So when we make the transportation more efficient, we use less oil. Somebody wanted to also try electrifying our cars. So as I said, there's some electrification that's happening. But if we accelerate that and we move toward more electrification of our cars or road and rail, then we might see further improvements. That's worth another 0.1 of a degree. It's not as dramatic as just banning oil entirely, but it also allows us to keep flying our airplanes and our ships and things for a little while. So, these are important levers. If we're a little bit more ambitious with these efficiency and electrification levers, we can squeeze another 0.1 of a degree out of the avoided future warming. Okay, so those were 2 ideas you wanted to explore. And then there's carbon price. And earlier, someone said on this qualitative poll that I posed, somebody said let's see, where was that? Carbon markets, CO2 market. Okay. So what does that mean? And this is a very important idea in economics, and it's a very important idea in all of our research here. So, I'm sorry, all technical. Ooh, okay, there we go. So what is a carbon price? A carbon price is the idea that right now it is free for me to burn coal, burn gas, put CO2 in the atmosphere, put methane in the atmosphere. It harms other people. They bear the cost of the pollution, of the climate change, of the effects, but I don't have to pay that cost. So there is what's called an externality in the economy, where external to my transaction of buying my electricity and fuel, someone else is suffering. So what a carbon price does is it says, make the polluters pay, make the polluters have to pay for the pollution so that that external cost gets internalized, gets brought into the price of the transaction. And we already have carbon pricing in Europe. The EU has an emissions trading scheme, which you're probably aware of. The price has been going up to about $50 a ton in the EU. Here in New England, where I live in the northeast part of the United States, we have a carbon price. We have a cap and trade system where we cap the emissions from our power plants, and then we lower that cap over time. The power plants have to have permits. If they are going to emit more than they're permitted, they have to buy permits from someone else. When they buy that permit, that sets a price for permits, and that's another way to have a carbon price. So it can look like a tax, a carbon tax. It can look like a cap and trade system like we have in our respective countries. Or it can look like a voluntary market where people say, I'm going to go net zero, or I'm going to go carbon neutral. And so I'm going to purchase offsets and removals on a voluntary carbon market, and I'm going to be willing to pay that price. And because I'm paying a price for my carbon emissions, now I have more of a financial incentive to decrease my emissions. So sorry for the little lecture there, but this is a really important concept in economics. So we're going to explore what this looks like. The first thing I want to do is with carbon price is, let's say that the whole world got a $50 per ton carbon price, which is kind of the more recent levels of pricing that we've seen in the EU. So let's see what that does. Okay, so that was worth another 0.3 of a degree improvement over and above us already investing in efficiency, already investing in electrification, and already reducing some of our methane emissions. So if we could just get the rest of the world to sort of catch up to where the EU is right now, that would be worth something. I want to also show the fun thing about a tool that's in the web browser is that I can just open up another tab with a fresh model here. And so if we just from scratch with no other policies, if the only thing that we did was a $50 price on carbon, what does that do? That's worth 0.4 of a degree. So pretty significant. Now, what happens if we were to ramp that up even more? So what if, and by the way, this is ramping up gradually over the course of 10 years. So it takes 10 years for us to put in these policies in place. Let's say that over that 10 years, we were able to get not just 50, but to $100 a ton. That's worth another 0.3. So it's actually, going from 0 to $100 a ton takes us 0.6 of a degree of avoided future warming, which hopefully now you're starting to calibrate how significant that is. And if we did that $100 price on carbon on top of the other things that we've done here, what you can see is that carbon price really disproportionately affects the coal industry because it's the most carbon intensive. And so that is where it has the biggest effect. But now we're starting to get toward this 2.3 degrees. We're getting closer. So if we look at the global temperature, we're getting close to sort of we're getting close, right? So the global goal here is to get below 2 degrees. At Paris, the goal was set to be below 2 degrees, ideally below 1.5. And then in recent years, at the last COP26 in Glasgow, everyone keeps reaffirming that 1.5 degrees is the right target. So we're still seeing at 2.3 degrees, we're still seeing deaths from extreme heat, but you've cut those almost in half with the kinds of changes that you've made. So let's take a look at other things that you've suggested that we haven't yet explored. Okay, population. Someone wants to explore about population. Now, population growth is something where what we do is we follow the UN forecasts about population growth in the world. So the default here is a median forecast, which is 10.9 billion people by 2100. That's the median guess. And so this is the default assumption. If I pull this down, what it's going to do is it's going to say birth rates are going to go a little lower in emerging markets, because keep in mind that if we look at population by region, most of that population growth, we actually see sort of decreases in China and India so an increase in India followed by it peaking and decreasing. But in other developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, we see this continued rise in population growth. If I pull this down, what it's doing is it's saying through ethical means, right? So maybe there's some Marvel fans out there. We're not talking about a Thanos button that kills half the population. That would be horrifying. We're talking about an ethical approach here, which is providing education and economic opportunity to girls and women. When they have economic opportunities outside the home, they tend to reduce birth rate, providing reproductive health and access and education to everybody. That also tends to reduce birth rates. So we can do that and go down towards the lower end of the UN forecasts based on that decreased fertility in emerging markets. Let's see what that does. Okay, so that was worth about 1/10 of a degree. Now, if we were in the room together and I could see all of your hands, I would say, okay, was that a bigger change than you thought it was going to be, or a smaller change? I'm guessing that, based on my experience, is that that's a smaller change than people think it's going to be. The reason is that this lower population growth is primarily occurring in emerging markets. And emerging markets are places where people are poor. And when you're poor, you don't emit as much carbon because you don't have a car, you don't fly the airplanes, you don't eat as much meat. And so we're decreasing population in places where the emissions per capita are lower. So the relative effects of that are not as dramatic in a sense. But that is a piece of the puzzle. And again, very ethically done in the form of women's empowerment and reproductive health education. Okay, but we're almost there, but we're not quite there. So I need to get you guys back on the poll here. So I want you to open up the poll and I want you to suggest some other things that we haven't tried yet, because we need to we're going to try to solve global climate change in 1 hour. I don't know if you knew that is what you signed up for, is to solve climate change in 1 hour, but we're going to do it. I just need a couple more suggestions about how we're going to get it done. Now, I see 2 things here that I haven't tried yet. So one is coal, and the other is afforestation, which means planting new trees. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So we've already significantly reduced coal through our carbon price. And maybe what we can do is just finally shut it off. So just stop building new coal infrastructure was something that I showed before. And that just, finally removes coal off the board and transitions to these other fuels. So that's fine. In this current scenario, it doesn't end up doing that much. If I go back to a sort of fresh model where we haven't done anything, but the only thing we do is just stop building new coal infrastructure, that's worth 3/10 of a degree. So it is actually a very significant improvement, as we described before. And particularly when you think about, again, as I showed before, the air pollution, stopping building that coal infrastructure saves a ton of lives. But because we've already significantly decreased coal with our carbon price and energy efficiency, we didn't see much incremental benefit. Fine. Let's plant some new trees. There's a big idea out there about a trillion trees initiative. The idea that we plant trees on all the available land, and those trees will absorb carbon. When people tend to buy carbon offsets or carbon removals, what do? They tend to go toward forestry projects where you're planting trees. It's the sort of go-to idea. There's a certain amount of land in the world that's available for afforestation. So places where there's not already cities or human settlements, or there's not already agricultural land, although mostly we're going to be taking this away from agricultural land, and where that it's possible to plant new trees. So we have to gain that land somehow. We're going to look at the land use implications. But let's say that of all the land in the world where we could plant trees, we'd plant on 50% of that. So that's a very significant number of trees. So what is using half of all the land that we could plant new trees? What is the result of that? Let's take a look. Okay, that was worth 1/10 of a degree. And again, to put this in perspective, let's look at the land for growing this biomass. So that equates to about the area of India. So the entire landmass of India, that amount of land, we've just planted new trees that otherwise wouldn't have been planted there before. Tremendous amount of forestry. And what that's done is it's taken 1/10 of a degree off the board. Now, universally, in any audience I work with, that is a smaller change than they anticipate. And we have to understand why. And by the way, I'll go to a fresh, just to do the same thing we were doing before. If I go on a fresh model, I aggressively afforest. Sorry, let me show the right graphs. So again, on a clear model where we're doing nothing else, it's not even worth 1/10 of a degree because we're still pumping so much carbon into the atmosphere. If we plant trees on all available land, like 100% of available land, we can get 1/10 of a degree of avoided warming. And that means 2 Indias worth of forests that we've planted. So why doesn't planting trees have the effect we think it's going to? What you can see here is that in this graph, you can see that the land use emissions are already going down to about 0 because we stopped the deforestation. And now what happens when I afforest is that we have these negative emissions, meaning that we're pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. But notice that it takes a really long time for that to happen because you have to secure the land. That takes on average about 10 years. You have to plant these forests and have them grow. That takes about 30 years. Some of the carbon fluxes back into the atmosphere as you have fires and other natural ecological change. It's not a permanent form of carbon removal. But the biggest reason is this delay. So one of the big ideas that I want you to take away from this is the idea of, we know about the time value of money. It's more valuable for me to have money now than it is in 15 years or 20 years. So we have a discount rate. There is a time value of carbon. The time value of carbon is that when I do things that reduce emissions right now, like energy efficiency or pricing carbon to drive more energy efficiency or conservation, or cut methane emissions, that's where I see big changes because we're cutting emissions right now. We're if you can think about the atmosphere is like a bathtub, and the faucet is that we're pouring greenhouse gases into that bathtub, and we can remove from that bathtub as well. But things that turn off the spigot have a very big effect on the sort of future warming here. So love trees, right? And great reasons to plant trees, restore biodiversity, all kinds of other benefits. But from a carbon perspective, it's 1/10 of a degree of avoided warming. So we are super close here. We're almost at the 2-degree target. There's let's see if there's any other. So there's another vote for renewable energy. So let's say that we invest in renewable energy. We subsidize those wind turbines, those solar panels, those geothermal installations. By itself, because we've already made so much work through carbon pricing, banning coal, we've already seen a very significant transition to renewables. But if even subsidizing that pretty heavily, it's not going to make much difference beyond what we've already done. If the only thing you do is subsidize renewables, you can get about 1/10 of a degree. That's also less effective than people think it's going to be because it doesn't automatically take coal, oil, and gas off the board right away. So what is a missing piece? What are some things that we haven't tried yet? Well, one thing is that when we attacked methane and other gases, we only did it through plant-based diets, agricultural emissions reductions. We didn't tackle the fact that when we've got natural gas and oil on the board for this next 20, 30 years, there is leakage of natural gas into the atmosphere. And that methane is 35 times stronger than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So if we reduce the energy and industry emissions of methane, as well as the agricultural ones, that's going to get us another 1/10 of a degree. So that's something that people don't often think about, but avoiding that methane leakage is important. And then the other thing is that nobody thought about electrifying buildings. So it turns out that even though we've significantly electrified our transport, we're still burning some coal and some oil and gas here. I'm heating my house off natural gas. If I can switch that to an air source heat pump, if I can change some of my industrial processes like steel making from burning fuels to electricity, that can actually have a fairly significant effect. And that can get us below the 2-degree mark if we make an ambitious investment in electrification. So now you have seen a future that gets below the 2-degree world. And I want to take a moment of silence. I want to conclude here by just taking a pause and just reflecting and considering, what does this future mean? What does this future look like? And what would you love about getting to be part of this future where we have tackled climate change, we've eliminated air pollution, we've avoided some of the worst consequences of these things, we've planted an India worth of trees, and I want you to just think about, what would you love about getting to be part of that future? And that's the last poll question that I'm going to pose here. Enough for all, everywhere, forever. A future for the child, a legacy, justice. Take care of our planet, contribute directly to a better future. We have to believe that this is possible, and we have to work in every way we can to create this future. It involves a tremendous amount of coordination across countries, across industries and sectors, across government and business, across innovation. And it requires tremendous innovation to deploy the energy efficiency technologies, the electrification technologies, the afforestation technologies, planting trees with drones. But this ensemble of solutions together can create the future that we want, can create this future. And I am incredibly grateful that you've joined us in exploring this together. And I encourage you to stay in contact with us at the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. I'm putting up a QR code here with links to all of our various ways to stay in touch. We're very active on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and this QR code links to all of those properties. Really appreciate being here with you today virtually, and hope this was a valuable and fun little exercise.
Thank you very much, Jason Jay. Thank you very much for being with us and for this amazing presentation. Thank you from Spain, and thank you from MadBlue.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.